What's up guys, MikeCoco back here, bringing you guys a new video on the new myth box that will be awarded at the end of the login attendance event. This event was introduced on the same day as the night system, and essentially we're going to be getting a free mythic season hero, and this video is primarily just going to be a guide on what hero to select. And this first video, at least the first part of this video, will focus on the free players, because free players, I'm assuming the fact that you're not going to buy any of the costumes because, you know, they're no longer for hearts. Because some of the costumes actually drastically changed the list. And so this first video is going to be about the free players. And the next video will probably be on the heroes with costumes. So I'm going to break this list down into two parts, one for PvP and one for PvE, because many heroes are suited for a specific mode. So let's just go right into it. Now, I'm assuming the fact that the free players do not have any of the mythic heroes currently, or they have very few that they have pulled from free premium hire. So first off, I'm going to go into PvP. The order goes something like this in my opinion. It would be Michael at number 1, War God Taihu at number 2, Remy at number 3, Saint Ione at number 4, and then it's a toss-up between Sarah and Gabe. I personally think Sarah should be a little bit higher than Gabe, because of the fact that costumes are not being accounted for. So the reason why I'm putting Michael at number 1 is because Michael is a tank in PvP. I've watched some replays in Mines where he literally just absorbs all the damage. Every hero on the other team just focuses on Michael, and the rest of your team is unscathed. So in that sense, it's a very good stalling strategy. You might have noticed this if you're fighting an arena, because your heroes always end up targeting the summon. Michael works kind of in the same way, but a lot more efficient, because he has low theory cost, because, you know, the skill lasts for 3 turns. And his costume is also available this month for free players, which means that if you haven't bought or picked a costume yet, you can in fact get Michael's costume and get Michael as well, which would be a really great pair. So Michael is very good for PvP simply because he's superb at stalling, and he can tank pretty much anything. I think I had a Lacita or a Claire, I don't remember which one, with like around 2 mil power, and one hit from their skill still did not break the shield. So it just shows how much power you actually need to first break the shield and then actually kill him. And then because he has a mythic skill of reviving after he's dead, he lasts even longer. So in PvP, Michael is extremely frustrating to deal with. So that is definitely why Michael is number 1, in my opinion. Number 2 is War God Taihu, because of his myth skill. Now, Taihu doesn't have an attack up like any of the other later or newer mythic heroes, which puts him at a slight disadvantage, but because his mythic ability is an increased damage in PvP and reduces damage received and immunity to critical hits in PvP, it makes him basically a PvP warrior. And because his costume is not that great, it just adds a dispel. I would say that without his costume, Taihu is still really great, especially because he has an exposed weakness, and as an added bonus, he does have a reduction in fury cost. So for PvP, Taihu is definitely great. Not so much for PvP, because he doesn't have that attack boost that some of the later heroes have. So the third choice is going to be Remy, of course. Remy is probably the most versatile hero, maybe aside from Michael. It depends on how you want to view the game. But Remy is definitely up there in terms of versatility. She heals, she removes dispels, and she removes negative buffs on your own heroes. Now, I did mention before that Party Ione is very similar to Remy. However, Party Ione has that one problem I mentioned during the Explore Guide video, where it's very difficult to center the removal of the negative buffs on or negative debuffs rather, on your own heroes. And Remy is kind of better because it's fixed around her in a 3x3. Not only that, she also has a dispel buff on the enemy, which is more than what Party Ione can do. And she's also a magic hero, and as you all know, magic hero, they deal a lot of damage in PvP. And so the basic gist of it is that the versatility of Remy and the fact that she is a magic hero gives her a tremendous boost in terms of PvP, especially with the fact that her Mythic skill actually means that you can't really stun her for the first X turns. And because you don't have access to the costume, you can just set Remy's skill to always use, and as long as Remy has enough Fury, which is definitely possible, she's only 200 Fury cost, you can theoretically remove buffs every single turn because Remy is in fact immune for a certain amount of turns. So you can just have her cast her skill every single turn, which makes it really frustrating to stun or bewitch in PvP. So, or silence rather. So that's why Remy is up there. Now, the fourth position is going to be Saint Ione, and I believe she only slightly edges out Sarah, simply because she has a Dispel and she buffs the rows and the columns that the allies are in. Now, typically, Saint Ione is probably better suited for PvE, but she does work fairly decently in PvP because of A, the Dispel buff, but also because she heals as well for the first 3 turns. Now, in current modes, or in current PvP rather, it's very possible and very likely that your heroes are going to die within the first 3 turns if you're fighting a very strong team. And so this HP healing, I guess, works very well because you don't even need to bring in a healer for the first 3 turns. And it also supplements healing if you do have a healer on the team. But more importantly, she increases the critical and attack rate for heroes in a row and a column. And because, again, she's a magic user, that means she's going to be dealing quite a bit of damage. So that's pretty much the reason why Saint Ione is above the list, or above Sarah. I still think she's only slightly higher than Sarah in terms of PvP because Sarah's skill is actually very good. She has a increased attack buff that goes up to 60% and a magic dot. Now, it's only 1 turn and it's 300 Fury, but the benefit of this is that her Mythic skill is actually very, very good. Her Mythic skill is a permanent increase to magic heroes' attack by 50%. So as soon as she is in battle, she's going to raise the attack for all magic heroes on her team by 50%. And if you're running a PvP team, you're likely going to have more than 1 magic hero because magic is so devastating in PvP. Which means that Sarah, combined with pretty much anyone, is going to run really, really well. Now, you don't really need the costume for this because the costume, I believe, just raises the attack to 75%, which is only a small 15% increase. If you compare it to her Mythic skill, which is a permanent 50%, it isn't really that much. So in that sense, her costume is not really needed. Similarly with Remy, you're going to be immune for that certain certain turns. So you can just keep casting her skill, which kind of negates the purpose of a 2-turn buff, or 2-turn preventing dispels, or debuffs rather. And Saint Ione, her costume isn't out yet, but it will increase critical damage, which is decent, but it's more of a PvE suited feature. And lastly, it's going to be Gabe, because Gabe is, I think, the last magic hero out of all of them. And Gabe, without a costume, is simply just Claire V2. He just gets a reduction in Fury and does slightly more damage, which is not that great because we already have Claire. So that's why he's last on the PvP list. So that's pretty much it for PvP. Now, I do want to go into PvE, and PvE is very interesting because as of now there are 2 modes, Explorer and Mythic Raid, and there's kind of like a distinction between certain heroes that are better for Explorer and certain heroes that are better for Mythic Raid. But I'm going to try and combine the list so I can cover more area than just having 2 separate lists for PvP, or rather MR and Explore. So my tier would go something like this. It would go Michael as number 1, then second would be tied with Saint Ione and Remy, the third would go to Komareo, the 4th spot would be tied again between Sarah, DQK, and Rag. After that comes Uriel, then Raphael, and then Gabe, and then Metatron. So I'll explain a little bit of why I think this is the case. So Michael, again, is number 1 because he is extremely tanky in PvE. And he has extremely good damage for Fury cost. So despite the fact that Michael does not deal the most damage out of all the Mythic heroes, just a hint and a spoiler, it's actually Komareo, he deals a lot of damage per Fury. When you consider his skill, he uses his initial skill for 200 Fury, but then he attacks normally for 3 turns, and assuming you can get close to the max of max Fury by getting each hit, you get 50 Fury from hitting the enemy every time. That's 150 Fury you get back. So in reality, you're only really paying about 50 Fury to use Michael's skill, which is absolutely great in terms of Fury cost. And both of these PvE modes are kind of restrictive on Fury, MR being a little bit more restrictive than normal. So that's why Michael is number 1 on my list, plus the fact that he does come back from the dead. So if he dies, he actually comes back to life, which is extremely useful in Explore, because as you know, if you die, you are no longer able to use that hero. But in this case, even if Michael dies, he does get another shot at life, which is really amazing. Now, the only problem with Michael is that on the Explore floors where the bosses hit in single target areas, Michael may not be that great, because Michael excels when he draws all the aggro towards himself. So certain floors on floor 5, I think floor 5-1 and 5-3 so far are the ones I know of, at least. They target single heroes on your team. So this means that on those floors, Michael will shine, but on floors like 5-2, where the boss hits in a 3x3, this may not be the case. But definitely still really good for Explorer, and very low on Fury consumption for Mythic Raid, so that's why he's number 1. Number 2 goes to a tie between Remy and Saint Ione, but I would put Remy slightly higher than Saint Ione, just dependent on your team. So the reason why is obviously Remy is super versatile. She dispels buffs, and these buffs are actually incredibly powerful in PvE. So on floor 5, 5-1 and 5-3 and 5-2 even, basically all floor 5, you have the Morganas that provide an attack buff and a defense buff. And the attack buff is extremely powerful. So just having Party Ione, it will be difficult because it's difficult to actually dispel those buffs. So with Remy, you can completely replace Ione and get rid of those buffs. Similarly, in Mythic Raid, the boss also has attack ups that you want to remove, otherwise they deal a lot of damage. So that's the reason why Remy is up there. Plus the fact that, again, she's super versatile, so she can go pretty much anywhere. Saint Ione is picked because she is an extremely good support hero. Now, I say that with like an asterisk because I've said previously that critical hits are, you can think of them as 2 times damage. That's not always the case. It's only the case when your attack surpasses the threshold of the boss's defense. So, for example, if you have a level 120 mythic weapon, obviously you're dealing more damage than the boss's defense, so you're going to be dealing actual damage. So 2 times in that case goes from probably like 20 million to 40 million. However, if you're using a weapon that's like maybe level 100 or level 110, you might not be dealing the same amount of damage. You might not be surpassing the threshold of the boss's defense, and you might be only hitting, let's say, 1 mil or 2 mil. And in that case, a critical hit will only net you, despite the fact that it's 2 times, only 2 mil difference. So from 2 mil to 4 mil. So the way I see it is that Saint Ione requires your entire team to be very powerful first in order to take advantage of the critical hit, because the attack buff itself is not too high, it's only 20%. That being said, it also dispels the buffs on the enemies, which again is useful for the same reason why Remy is useful rather. And her mythic skill is actually quite interesting. It heals for 100k HP for 3 turns. And one of my guildmates is actually using Saint Ione in Explore, like without using Remy, simply because they're able to remove the buff and then just automatically heal for 3 turns. They don't bring in a healer, and they just attempt to power through it on those first 3 turns with having 4 other damage dealers. So it's kind of like a positive feedback loop. Saint Ione works very well in this case. Now, the 3rd spot goes to Kamau, and the reason why Kamau is so high is because she deals so much damage. She hits on a row and a column, so you can just start to imagine how much tiles she's hitting. So in Mythic Raid, it's absolutely amazing. In Explore, not too much because the bosses are smaller. I believe they're like a 2x2 in Explore. So in this case, her skill is very good because she gets a 75% attack up, which is fairly normal now for mythic heroes, but the more important part is that she actually deals an extra 60% damage to bosses, so you can actually treat that literally as a 135% increase in attack. And this obviously makes her very, very good for mythic grade. She deals the most damage out of all these heroes, provided that you have enough fury to actually activate her skill. And so that's pretty much the reason why Kamel is so high up there. And I believe her costume increases her damage even further, I believe. I'm not too sure about that, but at this point, she out damages pretty much everyone on here, or at least everyone you can get from the Britania's arc. So that's why she's at the number 3 spot. Number 4 goes to a tie between DQK, Sarah, and Rag, and the reason is these 3 heroes represent every single weapon type. Sarah for magic, Rag for ranged, and DQK for melee. So it depends on how your team is formed. If your team has more magic users, obviously go with the magic mythic hero, which is Sarah. If you have more range, you go with Rag. If you have more melee, go with DQK. Now the reason why they're all so close, and the reason why Sarah is just a slightly tiny bit higher, is because her mythic skill is basically better. It's a permanent attack up by 50% for all magic heroes. And yeah, it's permanent. How can you like disagree with that? DQK and Rag both have a 40% attack increase, and it's not a permanent attack increase for ranged and melee heroes respectively. It's actually a 10 turn buff. So after 10 turns you will lose that buff eventually, but Sarah is a permanent buff, which is really amazing, and her skill is not too bad either. It's a 60% increase in attack, albeit it is 300 fury, so it's a slightly harder to pull off in mythic grade, but she will be dealing a lot of damage, and because it's magic damage, you don't have to worry about using too many defense debuffers, and that's probably the case if you're running a lot of magic heroes. You really don't need a defense debuffer because they already bypass defense anyway. And the reason why DQK and Rag are so high are basically they're the ranged and melee equivalent of Sarah. Their own skill is slightly better. Their attack raises at 75%, and they do add some kind of debuff. But the mythic skill is not permanent, which is pretty much the only reason why they're slightly lower. And DQK, her skill is absolutely ridiculous. It's a guaranteed critical hit, and it's a delayed dot along with a 75% attack up. And both Rag and DQK have slightly lower fury, so you could see why you could argue for either of the 3 of them in any case. Now the next one is Uriel. Uriel is low on this list because without his costume he doesn't deal enough damage. He is one of the few later season myths that don't have an attack up, and he only has an increased damage done to bosses, which is capped at 30%, so it's essentially only a 30% attack up, which is not too great. And he also costs 300 fury on his initial turn, of course, because he does get a reduction to 50%. Now his mythic skill is slightly more useful. It is a decreased damage received from monsters. However, I don't think that this is extremely useful in Explore because, like I mentioned already, the whole point of Explore is to power through it, not to like stall and reduce the amount of damage taken. Now, of course, this is a passive effect. You're not actually activating using a stalling strategy, but something that would be more preferred would be an attack up that would allow you to power through it. So that's just my take on Uriel. With the costume, he does change, but as of now, not too great. Now the next hero is Raph, and Raph, again, for the same reason of Uriel, she doesn't have, or he, I still don't know, they still don't have enough attack up. They provide a 30% attack up in a row, but why would you use Raph or get Raph when you can just get Saint Ione, who has, albeit 10% less attack up, but she gets a guaranteed critical, and she gets a better myth skill, and she dispels buffs. And she also buffs far more heroes than Raphael can ever buff, because Raph can only buff in a row, but Saint Ione buffs in a row and column. So you would pretty much be insane to pick Raph, and their myth skill is pretty useless as of now. It's an increased EXP after battle. However, it does get changed later on into, I believe, a weapon activation chance by 30% and increased critical damage by 30%. So it's slightly better, but if you combine it with her original skill, it doesn't shine in any particular way, especially when she's outclassed by Saint Ione. So that's just how I see it. And then we have Gabriel. Now Gabriel would be far higher on the list if we had access to his costume, but without his costume he is simply just Claire V2. Again, same reason for PvP. He's lower damage, or lower fury rather, higher damage than Claire. And that's essentially it. There's no attack up whatsoever, so you don't have access to anything else. You do start with 100 more fury than Claire at myth level 4, but you know, an attack up would be appreciated, but that's where his costume comes in. So yeah, that's why Gabriel is second to last. And lastly, we have Metatron, and the only reason why Metatron is worse than Gabriel is because her myth skill does not provide kind of like a party buff. In this case, Gabriel provides 400 fury, which means that you can use that 400 fury on your other heroes. Metatron only increases her own minimum damage, and her own minimum or her own skill rather increases her minimum attack and guarantees a critical. So again, we don't see any presence of an attack up. It does cost 300 fury, and she doesn't even get a fury reduction in that case. So all in all, not that great, at least until her costume comes out. So Metatron, as it looks right now, she's pretty much a worse version of Uriel. They're both 300 fury, but Uriel eventually becomes 150 fury, and she doesn't get any kind of attack up, even against bosses. So you pretty much have to rely on the fact that the minimum attack is boosted so much that it becomes almost equivalent to an attack up. So that's pretty much it for my take on PvE. A few disclaimers is that I did not account hero combos into this, and some people will disagree. I personally think that the skill is more important than the hero combo, because a hero combo is simply just passive stats. You can never get access to the unique skills provided by some of these mythic heroes by focusing on a hero combo. For instance, you could say that, you know, if I pick Remy, even though I don't really need her at this point, I get a higher attack boost in my hero combo, let's say by 30%. And so that gives me, you know, an extra 10 or 15% attack boost. That's really good. You could argue that, but with someone like Michael's skill, or someone like Saint Ione's skill, or even Kamal's damage, all of those skills provide something that is unique and not obtainable. And what I'm trying to say is that the attack boost that you get from the hero combo, yes, it is there, but in my opinion, it doesn't outweigh the advantage of having a strong skill. So that's the reason why I did not consider hero combos. And I think that is pretty much it. I will have, or at least I'll try to have, the video for costumes out soon. That one will be a little bit difficult because there's a lot of variance when it comes to introducing the costumes, because the costumes actually kind of put the heroes on similar levels, so it would be much more difficult to distinguish. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video, guys. Peace.